Hi, and welcome to the Critical Tech Podcast. I'm Joe Moniotis, and today we're talking about some massive developments in the sustainability space that we should all be aware of. I'm joined by the team at Carbon Critical, James White, the Chief Executive Officer, and Mike Paszti, the Chief Operations Officer. Gentlemen, how are you?
Well, we're doing great here in
Thanks for
sunny
having us again.
California.
Good to see you again.
Let's launch into business here and talk about your recent trip to China, because that's the topic of the day. So tell us about it.
Well, I would say it was one of the great business trips of my life. It was my ninth trip to China, and I have not been to China since 2016. So there's a big 8-year gap in my last between my last visit and this one, and
Mhm.
it is to me astonishing to see how much that country has transformed itself in just a few short years.
Mike?
It was my first trip, but of course, I'm not ignorant of the business environment or the culture change in environment. I have some ancestry there, and it was very eye-opening. You hear kind of the Western narrative here of you know industry unfairly subsidized and unfair trade practices and all that, and that was not the view we got in seeing this incredibly advanced country. Um, I don't want to spoil the surprise here, but there's a lot going on there, and it's just hard work basically and technological advancement that's responsible.
All right, so that's really what I want to elaborate on. Tell us about some of the things that you saw over there and what's happening in the sustainability space and in all other sectors of that type of technology.
So we started our trip in Qingdao, which is the northeastern seaport in China, and Qingdao is quite a nice city. It's the capital of Shandong province, which is one of the major coal mining regions of China. And uh, we started out, like I think maybe every traveler does, by going to the mall and buying some groceries, just to see what it would be like, and to get a bite to eat.
Yeah,
And
I went skating on a full-size skating rink.
Mike
Wow.
So
went
just
skating in the middle of summer
yeah, in a shopping mall,
in a
in the most
shopping mall.
beautiful
Shopping
indoor
mall.
skating rink I've ever seen. So,
Wow.
you know, they're advanced.
They have good things.
They
Yeah.
have good things.
And the grocery store was surprisingly good. I mean, it was as good or better than Whole Foods. All the brands were different, but and this was in the best shopping mall in Qingdao.
Hmm.
And I mean, a bag of groceries was like $7.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we were paying the highest possible prices. So um, I think going to a grocery store in a foreign country is one of those things that really sort of helps you to capture a lot about like what day to day living could be like, right?
Mm.
Right? Because it sets your baseline for what things cost and the quality of goods that are available in that place. And um, China is quite inexpensive, and the quality is very high. So we, I think, got a lot out of that first little trip, just in terms of setting the stage.
Excellent.
Now, granted, that was a higher end shopping experience. However, the point is they have the best, if you want it, they've got the best of the best anywhere in the world, or
Hmm.
those kind of posh surroundings. But the point is this country is advanced. Maybe not everybody's up to that advanced level and high income level. However, it's available. And that, like James said, I mean, the shopping experience is just sort of the first indicator that something's up here. Something good is going on. Um, a simple walk on the street was maybe the next indicator that or a ride on the train shows you that they've got better infrastructure, more orderly streets. Yes, there's cameras surveying every single move you make, but there's no crime, there's no dirt, there's no filth,
Mm.
there's
Mm. Mm.
just ample infrastructure everywhere. A train system that is high speed, it works, affordable, and uh, and then you start looking at the cars on the street, and you realize that the China of old, where everybody aspired to have a Buick, or a Cadillac or something. That is no longer the case. It's all domestic brands that are just flooding the roadways. Brands that most people never have heard of. However, these are huge car makers just because of the size of the market there. And these aren't sort of rickety first gen EVs. They are fully advanced hybrids and electric vehicles.
The other thing that really struck me was, in the last time I was in Shandong province, was deep in the inner part of that province, in a small town. Probably it was only 500,000 people or something, and the air pollution in that place in winter was so bad you could not see the sun at noontime. It was like just another planet. I mean, the air pollution was so unbelievably bad. Even in Beijing, in those days, 12 years ago, air pollution was just staggering. Qingdao didn't really have any air pollution.
No
And the air quality
gas.
was very good because
And
there
all
were
the
no,
scooters, all the couriers and everything, they're all electric scooters.
yeah,
No gas
electric
powered
scooters, mostly a lot of electric cars, especially in the city centers. There were no diesel belching heavy trucks, roaring around. I mean, it was a transformed country, and all of that had happened just in a little over a decade. So that really struck me. But onto our trip. So we were there as guests of Haibo Mo, who owns Henson Graphite, which is one of the graphite processing, graphite purification companies in China. And so our primary thrust for being in China was to gain a first-person understanding of the material supply chain for lithium-ion batteries and look at some recycling startups there, look at some established materials producers there. And by chance, we had the opportunity to meet an executive from Geely, which is the ninth largest car company in the world. So we actually had an immensely productive trip that really, really opened our eyes to how things work in China. So Haibo came in the morning. He picked us up in a nice Toyota Sienna, and we went for a drive. And that's how our learning began.
Right. So we talked about the graphite producing factories. Tell us about that. I mean, what was the next stage of the journey?
The next stage of the journey was to drive from Qingdao towards Weihai, which is about a 2.5 hour drive north. And along the way there is an industrial park or a city that has been sort of built from nothing in this marshland area in the sort of salt flats to the east of the highway. And so it's a city where they built buildings and roads and industrial infrastructure and housing developments and apartments. There's even a very good hotel, 5 stars. They just forgot one thing: people, which is surprising considering there's 1.4 billion people in China, but none of them live in this place because this city was just dropped there by the government, by the provincial government. They just built it. And they've created a lot of incentives for businesses to move in there, create employment, and that employment presumably attracts the human beings, which cities really need to thrive. And so we saw Haibo's large processing facility that's under construction. It at that time was not yet complete, but it was optimally located right near a great waste disposal facility provided by the government. There was on-site housing for his workers that was being built, so there's an apartment building going in for that. He had 4 huge warehouses under construction, just rows and rows and rows of machines ready to be installed.
Wow.
And all of that, from groundbreaking till when we saw it, was 8 months.
Wow.
And
great.
within the 4 more months, so by the end of this year, they will be producing first articles.
Yeah, and I wanted to sort of hit on that a little bit because you mentioned before about the massive change in the technology, like a massive improvement in technology over the last, say, 10, 15 years. Why? What's the adopting of like electric vehicles, that sort of thing? Why has that happened? I mean, why has it
Well,
happened faster than anywhere else, or what appears to be faster than anywhere else?
oh, it is faster than anywhere else in terms of the scale. I think Norway was first in terms of the like percentage of new vehicles, but it's a very small market. So as far as the world's largest car market goes, that is China. And as of today, more than 50% of new vehicles sold are so-called new energy vehicles. So these are
Hmm.
vehicles that are primarily driven by electricity. So why is that? And so this kind of goes to understanding a little bit of how China works internally. So from the West, we get a narrative that, oh, they're communists, they're bad people, they subsidize
Hmm.
everything, we can't compete, this, that, and the other. But that's not really what happens on the inside. There is central government planning of the economy. The government selects certain core areas and they decide that they want China to be a dominant player in those markets. For example, solar panels,
Hmm.
lithium ion battery production, electric vehicles, wind turbines, green energy, right? All of those markets are markets that the party has decided, and they set out 5-year plans to establish world dominance in those markets. It's not a secret. The plan is public. I mean, anyone who could read
Mm.
Chinese can read this plan, and a lot of people do read it.
I've been talking about it for years.
Yeah. Well, while we were talking about it, something was happening in China.
Yeah.
And that's the story, right? While we were talking about this and fighting internally and having mask wars or whatever it is we were doing, um, the Chinese government started out by seeding in any given major industry probably over 1,000 companies in each
Wow.
industry. And then those companies, which did receive money from the government to get started
Hmm.
predominantly, and they may have had some special aptitude for the specific technology. They might have had an innovation in
Hmm.
that field. Perhaps it was founded by a professor or an academic or a famous entrepreneur in China. Or maybe they were just very good at drinking baijiu with the local party officials. I mean, nobody really knows from the outside how it all happens. But the end result is that these 1,000 companies begin to get products on the market and then they start competing with each other. And
Hmm.
so there is this war of attrition. It's just this brutal knife fight of just relentless internal competition. So there's this idea of China speed. Everything's happening at incredible speed. New factories are being built, and those are the most efficient factories, so they get all their capacities utilized, while the older, less efficient factories have less and less market share, and finally they just disappear, right? So that process of like continually upgrading and updating and renewing the technologies leads to this very, very fast adoption of new innovations, right?
Mm.
It is very tight margins, so people are really hurting for profit, right? They suffer.
Mm.
And there is a lot of attrition. So out of those 1,000 companies, probably 990 will die.
Right.
But what happens is the 10 that survive are the 10 who can create a product which is marketable in overseas markets so they can get higher
Hmm.
margins by selling overseas. And they can do that at very large scale, right? And so the few companies who survive this brutal process are truly world-class companies. And these are the companies that are then exporting Chinese production, Chinese technologies
Wow.
to the entire world. And that's what changes the world. That part is what concerns people in the West. The fact that a lot of Chinese startups have tremendous attrition it doesn't matter at all to us because that doesn't impact our world. But when these huge companies that are well established in their domestic market now start exporting vast amounts of world-class goods, all of a sudden alarm bells start ringing. And so that's the moment we're at today.
I mean, it's I guess the question that comes up for me is then what is the West doing to, sort of catch up with that? Because that seems like a very churning process, which brings, like you said, the best of the best out. And I just don't see what's the equivalent in the West and how the West can stay competitive. Mike, maybe can you give some thoughts on that?
Well, we all know that the Western governments, they do subsidize research um, and sort of nascent industries and things, but um, China's got advantages. I mean, they've got far more government support. They've got far more domestic market to hone their production, hone their capabilities. So, um, and they have a whole bunch of rules and regulations that they just don't have in North America. I mean, North America kind of, in the West in general, gave up trying to be a manufacturing economy a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relatively small portion, 15, 10, 5%, depending on the country, of GDP. Um, and we're trying to get back into it to some degree. But because everybody likes to have domestic control of his or her automobile manufacturing in particular. But you got to wonder, are we? Is it worth it? I mean, at the end of the day, you're competing against this juggernaut that's got a huge head start. Um, do we protect domestic production of battery materials at any cost? Uh, I don't know. Maybe not at any cost. Um, having said that, does that mean that we just give up and don't do anything here? Well, no. I mean, there's value-added activities. There's still things we can do, and we need to have certainly shipping and transport. That's an advantage because if you have to sell here, it's nice to have things here instead of shipping them overseas and back and forth. I mean, if you look at the map for battery materials, they go all over the world. They travel a lot across Asia, from Australia to Malaysia, and it just goes on and on. And so, that's not always a good thing. So anyway, there is an opportunity for domestic production, but we can't pretend that, we can just sort of be as good as someone who's got a more advanced, further developed, large domestic market, and countless advantages, everything from environmental to labor laws, like just huge advantages. Um, it's not an apples to apples comparison. Uh,
Well, there's going to be some tipping point, surely, when something is realised and things have to change. I mean, you can't keep sort of adding obstruction to this type of stuff, and then other countries are now maybe using even that model or something similar to that, and some countries are living in a bubble still, and the bubble will burst. So that's kind of what I'm getting out of this, and it seems to be at a pace that the ordinary person who's watching it maybe isn't grasping. Would that be fair to say?
I would say the average American has absolutely no idea what mainland China is like at all. I mean, they're not grasping this or anything else about China. I think that's certainly the message from being there on the ground. But to emphasize Mike's point, I think we are at that tipping point now with Chinese vehicle production. And what really changed the game was that in the old days, a car was an engine, which was a very, very complex piece of machinery that had to last a really long time. It was an emissions control system. It was a very complex transmission. It was a lot of really complex machinery that really played to the strengths of Japanese and German and American manufacturing. But now a car is more or less a battery on four wheels.
Right.
And I would challenge anyone to identify an electronic product that is not made in Asia. I mean, to find me one thing. You can't. So the fact that we're putting four wheels on a battery is really in their wheelhouse. This is something they can do extremely well, probably better than anybody on earth. Much in the way that, maybe Porsche made the best engines once upon a time, or maybe they still do. Maybe that doesn't matter, but that was their advantage, right? They made beautiful stuff.
Yeah, I think the protectionism that governments are putting in now, I mean, they're flailing. I mean, 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. I mean,
Wow.
you're slowing the inevitable.
If that's not a desperation move, I don't know what is,
Yeah.
truthfully. And I think the key point is also to look at this through the eyes of an American consumer. A very, very high quality Chinese EV in China costs 35 grand. I'm thinking of the BYD Han as an example. And if that car was widely available in the United States, and let's say it's 45 grand by the time you get it here, the average sticker price of a new car sold in this market is $54,000. So at least $10,000 per vehicle times 11 million vehicles sold per year. That adds up. That's $110 billion that consumers are paying to legacy car makers in the United States every year that they really don't have to pay. So 110 billion would presumably go to other uses, right?
There's an economic principle called comparative advantage, and you learn it in your first economics course in college. Like there's no point in trying to do something that somebody else can do more efficiently, and that's what's happening here. Like James said, that money can go be spent somewhere else. I think the design studios, the interface displays, there's various design elements that you could maybe do in North America or in the West. But the raw battery manufacturing, like the raw, even the motor assemblies and all that, I mean, I think it's inevitable that China's going to be a huge player in the world. I mean, they already are, just with their own domestic
It's not
market.
inevitable. That's the way it is. I mean,
they're huge, and they haven't even left their own doors, their own backyard practically, because that's China. It's huge. Anyway, Europe sees a lot more Chinese cars. We haven't even, you see, like, I think we saw, coincidentally, when we landed back in San Francisco, I saw that wasn't a Chinese car, it was a Vietnamese car.
VinFast,
VinFast. But maybe that was just sort of an omen, a sign of things to come. There will be an influx.
VinFast is going to struggle with their neighbors' competition. Vietnam is not nearly the equal of China. Not yet. Maybe someday.
No, and everybody hates their cars too, so that's the other problem.
Okay, well, that's their own fault.
Right, well, delve a little bit deeper into the trip. What else did you see? Where else did you go? And what other evidence of this sort of juggernaut did you experience?
So we left Qingdao. We flew to Hangzhou, which is a lovely city. It's about 8 million people. So it's in Zhejiang province near Shanghai. And we visited with a startup there, which is using direct recycling technology for LFP batteries, which is sort of a new frontier here in the United States that's still considered research, but at China speed, yesterday's research is today's production.
Yeah.
And it's tomorrow's obsolescence. So, I think that company, which we know spun out of UCSD, University of California, San Diego, really understands intuitively that in order to commercialize a new technology in the battery market, you don't go to a US producer or a European producer of batteries, because those producers, by and large, are captive to one or two or three clients. So they're very captive production. You go to China, where there are 25,000 producers still, all cutting each other's throats, looking for that small advantage. And there's 20 million buyers. So you have a much more dynamic market in China, and if your innovation is a real innovation that will help people make money, then they're going to adopt it very, very quickly. The rate of adoption is very fast. So I think they intuitively understood that, and going into this, we did not understand that. But we
Sodium
know
ion
it now.
batteries.
You and in terms of this is like when you say you did not understand that, do you mean you guys did not understand it as a team, or the we don't understand it?
We didn't understand it
So where were your
personally.
learning?
I don't
Yeah,
think anyone we talked to understood it, because if
yeah.
you were to propose a business plan where your go-to-market is let's take this technology to China, people would think you were insane,
Right.
right?
I was thinking of sodium ion batteries. I was at the same time that they're being commercialized in China, you had the West and so-called experts talking about sodium ion is not going to work. It's got problems, la la la. So all these, sort of hemming and hawing. At the same
Wow.
time, it's literally hitting the market like in record time, from like concept to production in what, a couple of years or something.
Mhm.
18 months maybe.
It's crazy. So we're still debating whether it's theoretically possible, and they're doing it.
You can buy them on Alibaba. I mean,
Wow.
I think the debate is over. Um,
Hmm.
you know, uh, yeah. So then from Hangzhou, we went to Shanghai and just saw sort of the retail side of this. We went to see, for example, a Huawei store. So on East Nanjing Road, there's Huawei on one side and Apple on the other. I think Huawei is much more popular in China.
So
Um,
huge cell phone maker for the uninitiated, huge telecoms maker. It looks kind of like an Apple store, except there's
Hmm.
cars inside of it, and phones, of course,
Wow.
lots of phones, foldable phones, like better phones than we have in the West. There's a whole.
Mm.
We don't
huge
even want to talk about
TVs,
cell
high
phones.
resolution TVs,
Huge
all
TVs,
kinds of computers.
all cheaper, largely better. We have no clue in the West. You cannot get
Wow.
Europe. You can to some degree, but North America, you cannot get Huawei phones or
So,
Mm.
anything.
so the Huawei vehicle display area had four vehicles, and these vehicles were all created by third-party car makers for Huawei, and they all incorporated their advanced self-driving system, which includes a LiDAR, which is not even, I don't think, in contemplation for any Western car maker, but it has LiDAR, which is a very advanced ranging and obstacle identification technology. It's used on Waymo, for example. They have a miniature LiDAR, which just lives on the top of the windscreen, right above the driver, and it sees everything. And you see vehicles with this system driving
Wow.
around on Chinese roads, right? So they have a much more
Wow.
advanced, full self-driving, point to
And
point.
the and making good cars, the Koreans know it, everybody knows it. It takes a long time to make good cars. And the interiors of these cars, the exterior styling, I mean, that's always subject to matter of taste, but they looked good. They looked good, they felt good, they smelled good. I mean, they're proper cars. They're not the joke that,
Mm.
say, early Hyundais were, or
Yeah. Yeah.
early anything. Like, they are modern,
Yeah,
fully beautifully executed cars.
yeah, they are way, way, way beyond a 1980s Hyundai. I mean, this is a car that will sell in a global market, and that's already happening in lots and lots of
And the
countries.
prices were just jaw-dropping. Like, just full luxury for economy car prices.
Yeah, so I mean that
So
really
what
hammered home
percentage
for
of the
us,
yeah.
why
Right. Wow.
why there are 100% tariffs. Why are there 100% tariffs?
Yeah.
Well, when you can buy a luxury car for the price of a Honda Civic, that's why there's tariffs.
So what percentage of the population over there is sort of benefiting from this massive jump? Like I guess still the perception in the West lags in terms of where the majority of the population, say the middle class, is over there. Where are they? I mean, are most of the middle class able to get this type of stuff and access it quite readily with incomes and that type of thing? Or are they, is it, yeah, how is it skewed
I,
from
I
your, from
think
what
it's
you,
important to, I mean, I think on average, and nobody's going to argue that the average Chinese person is not as wealthy as the average American, let's say.
yeah,
However, it's a trajectory, I think, that really matters. That trend is
right,
really more indicative than status, the current state of things.
yeah,
It's easy to sort of get distracted and say, well, look, I mean, the average countryside dweller in China is does not have an EV. He doesn't even have a good car. He doesn't have a car at all. He has a horse or whatever, a donkey cart. That's not the point, because that's going to change in time, and the
Mm.
trajectory they're on, that's going to change. So I don't know. I don't know what the exact demographic stats are, but I know it's not exactly the land of equality just yet. But my gosh, the number of people that have moved from rural areas to the cities, I mean, we all know that's for
Mm.
the last 20, 30, 40 years, it's just been a tremendous change in culture, standard of living, and we know which way it's going. They're going through some bumps post-COVID. There's challenges. There's demographic challenges as well in terms of age distribution. By and large, though, they've got a lot of strengths. Um, and we know they're knocking on everybody's doors. They want to sell their products because they're good.
Mm.
It's not unfair. It's not subsidized. Yes, there's government support, but guess what? All the industries and all the countries have government support.
Yeah, I mean, there are no homeless people that we observed. Um, Everybody seemed to be properly fed. I mean, admittedly, we're going between big cities, so
Mm.
on this trip, I didn't go to any rural areas, unlike prior trips. Sorry, but I didn't see anyone with a donkey cart on this trip.
I was looking carefully as we rode the trains across the countryside. I was
Yeah.
actually keeping an eye out for, what does it look like outside of the cities? And it's not terrible at all. It's an advancing country. It's a growing country.
Mm. Mm.
Education, healthcare, it's all getting better. Um,
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
guess you
mean,
can't
I
say
mean,
that about here in Australia, for example. I mean, I don't think our standard of living is growing. In fact, it's decreasing. I'm sure it's the same in the US as well. I mean, from what I hear, it's harder to live now than it was, a little while back, and even further back than that.
Depends which part of the
Yeah, fair enough.
yeah. No,
societal groups you're in. Yeah.
think of 180,000 homeless people on the streets of California. Well,
Mm.
there's zero on the streets of Shanghai, which is about the same
Yes.
population. So that should tell you something.
Yeah.
Um, and I think everyone would say, oh, well, they just brutalize them and don't give them their human rights to sleep in a park. But, or maybe
Well, I mean, they
maybe
seem
that's
to have raised a lot
maybe
of people out
not,
of.
right?
Yeah.
I don't want it to make it sound like we're in support of the Communist Party and their say their views on how what society should look like. Not at all. I think it's important just to maybe just focus on what does work, and their focus on the right technologies and the right industries is really, I think, what is to and they're just in manufacturing friendly environment in China has enabled the kind of growth and advances in standard of living and technological capabilities in China. Um, where I'm not pro-communist at all. In fact, there's a lot of appalling things in China uh, that you'll see in the news and that we saw to some degree as well.
Mm.
There's a cost to all that order that we
Mm.
saw.
Mm.
So,
It's true.
Well, I guess that's
but
the big question, isn't it? Like, how do does the West create some type of environment where all this is able to be, um, we're able to match this intensity, whether it be in manufacturing cars or in other areas, while maintaining what we have created, which is unique in the West. I mean, the freedoms that we have and the way of life and all of that type of stuff. We're getting a bit philosophical here, but that's the big question, because I think some of the things that you know naturally there is a tendency in the way the West is built to then go off onto these extremes in whatever it may be. The political system, for example, you can easily see the slippery slope to, you know, um, just chaos, because everyone's kind of fighting and infighting and all of that. And a lot of money's being spent on that. Whereas, a system like that is very orderly and doesn't, have that same type of chaos, so they can focus a lot harder on things. So I guess the big question would be what is the takeaway from the trip, in that regard? Like, what could the West, or what could Western countries use to it's what could Western countries do, or copy or emulate, that is good, while maintaining what we have?
That's a very good question. My thought is, if you want a stable, prosperous world, I think you achieve that through trade and through sort of trips like this, where American people see what China's really like. Because nobody would go there and do a trip like this, and we haven't even gotten to the best part, and come back and think, oh yeah, that's exactly what I saw on Fox News. It's just the way I thought it would be. Like, that's impossible. Nobody would ever do that. I mean, so if you want to like maintain that hostility towards the Chinese government or their system or whatever, I mean, if you're going to maintain that, you have to never set foot in China. You have to just put the blinders on, not take in any outside information, and just believe everything you hear. So the inverse is that you find ways, which by and large we have done, to make use of what China's very good at, which is manufacturing, for example, and benefit from that here, right? While preserving things that we're very good at. For example, software, finance. I mean, there are a lot of things that Americans are still the best in the world at. And so rather than trying to be the best in the world at something that they're already really good at, right? Just we have our lane, they have theirs, and then we trade.
Yeah. And we're trying to play a game that we were trying to play a game, the manufacturing game that we kind of gave up playing a long time ago. We're great at scientific innovation. We're great at R&D. We're not great at kind of using our fingers to put stuff together. I mean, we're great at it, but it's just too expensive.
Our fingers cost too much money.
Our fingers cost a lot of money. Those labor-intensive kind of jobs, they're not our thing. And you know what? That's been okay for the longest time. But I think what we can learn from China, though, is, let's get on the same page at least. I remember in various fields, governments would say things like, Western governments would say, like, we don't pick winners and losers. Well, that just means you're going to have a bunch of losers probably, because you're going to spread your money out across all these different groups, and nobody's going to be dominant, nobody's going to win. And whereas, the Chinese mentality is like, okay, these are the priorities. They're national freaking priorities. We're not keeping them secret. Everybody in the world's going to know this is what we're focused on, because they're really important for the world. And lo and behold, big surprise, the Chinese dominate. So,
well, they dominate those certain things.
Right? And we could have very similar kind of. It's really just focus and getting everybody on the same page. Like, the governments have the opportunity to say, these are important industries. Okay, maybe we're not going to be manufacturing and competing head to head with China, but we can be the leaders in. Think of microprocessors. Where were all the best microprocessors designed and conceived? I mean, Intel was a giant, right? And you had Digital Equipment Corporation, you had HP, you had all these people designing all the best processors in the world. Not a single one was made here, right? But they were all designed here. All the iPhone, right? Where every single thing in that phone was, well, not everything, but the big stuff was all conceived here. Final executions in China and Malaysia, wherever. But so we know what we're good at. And we know what we're not good at.
In the spirit of trade, those iPhones are made in China, but it still costs you over $1,000 to buy a new iPhone in Shanghai. So, an American company is getting real money from Chinese people for their world-class product, right? So that is also definitely happening. I think it's naive to think that just by virtue of some sort of nostalgia for the old ways that we're going to want to drive substandard cars or use old technology phones and pay a premium price, forever, even though there's great stuff available to us over there, right?
I had a Chinese phone a couple of years ago. It didn't work too well with the North American bands. However, it was shockingly good. It was shockingly good, 30% cheaper. And the phones have just gotten better since then. I mean, there's like three, four, five different brands of phone that we cannot get in North America, and they're outstanding. Um, OnePlus, Xiaomi, Huawei, like they're great, great phones. Can't get them here. They're cheaper. They're arguably better in one or many ways than the current market. So I think protectionism's, it's a dead end. I mean, everybody knows economically, eventually the way you create wealth for everybody is through trade, free trade. So there is a time where, these tariffs are going to have to be sunset or something. Because, I mean, the consumer ultimately pays, and that's bad for the economy. There's a misallocation of people's discretionary income, and it's basically another way of saying your consumers are wasting money, and they don't have to do that.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, for me, especially here in Australia, I see a lot of things that are set up against innovation. And, like you mentioned that the West is good at innovating. Yes, pioneering things and inventing things and all of that. That's huge. And it's just, things that hinder business, things that hinder innovation,
Protectionism
are
hinders
sort of
innovation.
being, yeah, but there are other things as well, like, uh, high taxes for a start, not enough incentives to innovate and create and that type of thing. And then, even the government grant system, you don't know who you're handing those government grants out to. They're not necessarily always going to be handed to the right companies. So that's kind of what I worry about. That I think you mentioned it, the national focus on, okay, this is what we're focusing on, and then just allowing the competitiveness and the innovation of different companies and different minds to get to work on it and compete for the best to compete for the best product, and then somehow streamline that into part of that national focus and that national industry. And we just don't have that. We've got things all over the place that are almost competing against each other. We've got policies that sort of take away from, merit-based achievement or success. We've got, the high taxes. We've got, policies that, you mentioned, James, 180,000 homeless people, for example. I mean, what's that doing to the economy of California? It must be crippling it. Because of the
It's an industry unto itself.
Okay, but it's not. It would be impacting some of the retail and innovative sorts of things. So that's what I'm struggling to sort of wrap my head around as to how Western countries are not streamlining what they're doing.
Well, I think what we know for sure is we're not going to solve it on this podcast.
No.
That's a really
nice
big
to get that
question.
Insight from what you're seeing over there. And I guess you mentioned before that you haven't mentioned the best part of the trip, and that's now what I want to get into. Like sorry, I think you said the best part of the trip. We haven't mentioned the best
part of the trip. Well, yeah, the highlight. Yeah, we took the train to Shenzhen, and then we met people from BTR. And BTR is the world's largest producer of graphite anodes for EV batteries. Wow. So, I mean, this is a truly colossal company. And they started very humbly from Harbin University, which is way in the north of China. And they began by just refining graphite that was mined in old graphite mines that were opened by the Japanese in the 1930s and 40s. And the Japanese, of course, were pioneers in using graphite for lithium-ion batteries. So, they probably learned from or copied the Japanese method and began there. And that was about 25 years ago. And then they grew and grew and grew and grew some more. And they became a colossus. I mean, their production is going to be 1 million tons of graphite per year. I mean, that is like 1 terawatt hour of lithium-ion batteries. So it would supply, all of Europe, something like that, right?
Wow.
One company. And one of the great things about business travel in China is they're wonderful hosts. You have banquets. They serve baijiu, which is this very strong distilled alcohol that is an integral part of Chinese business. There's a whole culture and ritual around that. And if you don't drink and you're a man, you better learn to drink because you cannot do anything without that. Women get a pass. Good for them. But yeah, and then they serve, they have private banquet rooms that they have in their office high-rise buildings, and they serve fantastic food, and it's sort of this ritualistic way of interacting with their guests. So this is wonderful. We then saw their world-class R&D facility, which was a 25-story high-rise. All of their scientists lived in a 25-story high-rise next door, so there's no commuting. That's very convenient. And then we went to see one of their 5 production plants. And so this was a plant that was producing synthetic graphite and was also refining natural graphite. And it's about 2 hours out of Shenzhen. And when you walk into a factory like this and see the actual furnaces, the actual production equipment in action, it is just staggering. There's enough electricity going into that place to power a city, and not a small one, right? The room with the furnaces is just gigantic, like 1 million square feet probably. I mean, just huge, right? There's a whole other warehouses with coating and spheritization, and every step in the process is being done there.
And I just want to add that it was not spotless. Like you're making a black dust, but given that you're making a black dust, it was very clean, like very clean. They take care of that place. They really take pride. I've been to battery processing, recycling places that deal with a graphite-like material, and everything's black. Every surface is black. Not here. You can actually see the equipment
Yep.
and the different colored equipment and railings and floor and everything. So very different than the West.
Yeah. Well, and they have 700 workers living on site. So,
Very efficient.
they're very, very efficient, right? They're not paying large salaries so people can go and rent a house down the street. All of that is provided, and there's a salary, of course. These people are not enslaved. And I mean, they just get it done, right? And I think, unless you've seen it, you can't quite imagine working in that sort of environment for relatively not much pay. And it was extremely hot, right, for one thing. And just the scale at which they do it. And of course with very tight tolerances, right? Because batteries are extremely sensitive to the quality of the materials going into them. So they're making a tier 1 product, and they're doing it very well. It's very well controlled. And they're doing it at very, very large scale, and they're doing it extremely cheaply. And they have ready access to electricity at 7 cents a kilowatt hour, so good rates. They're not paying nothing. They pay something, right? Their raw materials are bought on a global market, so they have all the same inputs that we would have, right? There's no free lunch in any large industry like this. It's not possible, right? It would bankrupt they would just run out of subsidies or bankrupt their
Yeah.
vendors. I mean, at some level, once you get to be that big, you have to be able to function sustainably, or else you're just a perpetual drain on whoever's paying your bills. And so it was amazing. I mean, it was so big and so well run, and that's only one of their 5 factories, and they're building other factories in other countries. So they're exporting this way of producing to other countries and doing it at even larger scale in outside of China. That to me was astonishing, because there's a great deal of talk about doing stuff like this, in the United States or in Canada, but I can't imagine how those producers would compete with a Chinese or an Indonesian or a Moroccan, where the company doing the production also has decades of experience in the industry. They're built into SOPs and production lines all over the world. They're embedded already. I mean, how are you going to displace someone like that? It's impossible. Who's going to take the risk on your little operation?
Well, exactly.
So that really brought home maybe the futility of a lot of things that we're trying to do now. And 30 or 40 years ago, we produced graphite anodes in the United States. That was something that we just gave to the Chinese, because we're like, I don't want to make this dirty, smelly, energy hogging stuff. Let them do it. We made a conscious choice. We gave it to them, and just saying we want it back is not going to make it so. I mean, that's just delusional, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it can come back, because they have a fully optimized, where all the costs have been wrung out of a process in their market.
Right. Yeah.
We can't
Even
do
if
it.
even if you somehow miraculously brought yourself your theoretical, practical, and your manufacturing knowledge up to their level, you maybe have the same thing, except it'd be 1/100th the size, which is uncompetitive. So in other words, it's impossible at so many levels. You wonder what the point is of trying to replicate what China's already built.
Well, and then also from a very, very high level perspective, consider that, all money is fungible. And if you spend 100 million here or 100 million there, which plays to your strengths is likely to build up your economy more? Is it some sort of innovation like, Americans invented generative AI? Okay, well, that's pretty cool. There's a few trillion of value there. Or do we want to spend that money trying to compete on something the Chinese do perfectly with 2% margins?
That will never find enough workers to do here.
Yeah.
It's
You couldn't even find a
disgusting and
worker to do
dirty.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or you'd have to, yeah.
why fight that battle? That's really the
And the
question.
funny thing is, trying to encourage that manufacturing here is actually slowing down EV adoption, because it's going to push up the prices of EVs.
Yeah.
Domestic EVs, like you're force fitting this domestic manufacturing of battery guts and components to make more expensive batteries than you could have just bought from somebody else. That's going to hurt EV adoption.
Yes, I mean, what was the main? I mean, you guys obviously you went there as the team of Carbon Critical. What were the main sort of takeaways for Carbon Critical from this?
My main takeaway was, if we truly wanted to decarbonize transportation tomorrow or today, we would open the floodgates and import every Chinese electric vehicle we could get our hands on en masse. We would have just ship after ship after ship flooding the United States with every EV. People would buy them, they'd drive them all over the place, and the greenhouse gas emissions from our everyday driving around would quickly start to fall and eventually go to nothing in the course of about 20 years. If we really wanted to solve it, we'd do that tomorrow. But we're not going to.
Mike?
You could open the floodgates for a lot of things, everything from energy equipment, energy storage equipment, battery, stationary storage, energy storage, EVs, phones. You could probably improve the average person's life tremendously by opening the floodgates from China for a vast array of products, just like we have in the past with many other industries. Evolve to a model where we do what we're good at, they do what they're good at, everybody's richer in the end, and then ultimately we trade freely. And if we're fearful of that, then we've got to figure out why we're fearful. Is it because we need to invest more in R&D? Because we need to boost up the things we're good at? Because we're not as good as we thought we were? Maybe that's the answer.
Create the right conditions.
Is our education system failing us? Is our allocation of government spending and grants failing us? That's possible. Not every investment by a government is gonna be a winner. That's okay. But maybe we're spreading too little money too thin across all these various causes that maybe we need to focus more on the really important stuff. So,
gentlemen, I think we can leave it there. It's been a fascinating discussion. It's been amazing to learn about what you guys experienced, and it's I really hope that people, Western countries and every country really does exactly what you said, and really lifts up the industries that it's expert in, and just sort of makes that shift so everyone can benefit. Any final words?
I think we're still processing what we saw in China. It's going to impact everything we think and do for the next little while. So, and you know what? It's not the end. Like, there's lots more stories and lots more evolution happening. Policies changing in the Americas and in Europe right now. This is just the beginning. We're just at the beginning of this roller coaster. There's going to be changes and things happening for years. We're just seeing the beginning now.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's my parting thought is I can't wait to see what they do next, and I really hope that we can bridge these two cultures and have a common benefit that lifts up both the West and the Chinese market.
Excellent. On that thought, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.